Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, vandalism and fires at 3 churches in Bethesda. Is the county doing enough to stop the violence? Is critical race theory an issue in school board elections? Latest poll has CD8 leaning left. Can David Trone hold on to his congressional seat? And is the Elrich Blair race within the margin of error? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former county council member Mike Knapp and Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. The social fabric of Montgomery County seems to be pulling apart in so many different directions. Last Saturday, 3 churches, 1 Roman Catholic, 1 Methodist, and 1 Baptist, were vandalized. 2 of the churches were set ablaze. Mike, is the county reacting appropriately to what appears to be left-wing violence by pro-abortion groups?
Well, I guess I would take a little exception to the end of that sentence. I mean, I think that there is one, I think the county is taking appropriate actions. Unfortunately, we in Montgomery County have seen violence against places of worship more than we'd like to, and whether it's been our synagogues or our mosques. And so I think the county understands the sensitivities and how to engage with the particular communities, to work within those communities to make sure that people feel safer and secure. I think we also have a lot of places of worship, and so I think it's challenging to preemptively determine where things are going to be and where things may occur next. I am, and unfortunately this happened even in my own church, I am a little concerned at the notion that, or even a lot concerned at the notion that we're trying to be more divisive and assume that this must be pro-choice activists, and I'm just not. I haven't seen any indication of that. I've seen speculation. I've seen a message come out from my church saying we should be vigilant. And to me, we're at a time where, if anything, we should figure out how to engage in a dialogue that's going to be a really challenging dialogue for our country for the coming months, weeks, months, years. And I think our faith communities have to figure out a productive way to help engage in that conversation. And I haven't seen, unfortunately, at least personally, anecdotally, that that type of approach coming out yet. I've seen much more of a defensive posture and much more of an assertive posture and aggressive posture, as opposed to a how do we engage in a productive conversation posture. And I think that's got to happen in order for this to get better.
Well, from my perspective, the announcement that the county executive released after these terrible incidents was inadequate, was not strong and forceful enough, and I think it does a disservice. Mark, let's get your opinion on this.
Well, I think, I mean, to pick up the point where we've now taken what was seen for 50 years as a judicial issue, and it has now become a political issue. It is a political question, and it is going to be challenging in our jurisdiction and other jurisdictions around the country to get that right. Obviously, there are difficult choices involved in that, and it's going to be that much harder because we now don't have the courts to tell us what to do. We're going to have to rely on legislators to make those choices. Violence and what have you are completely inappropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but I mean, this isn't just an isolated incident. There are other incidents that are occurring in the county that also are related. And Mark, the Washington Post editorialized that the county executive needs to enforce existing picketing laws to address the lawlessness which is occurring in front of Justice Roberts and Kavanaugh's home. Followed up by the Montgomery County Police announcing that they're going to start enforcing the law. So this isn't the first example.
Well, you're right, and I mean, one of the challenges in this is that let's distinguish between the role of the courts, which is to settle legal disputes, and not to set public policy. And what they've done is move things back to that. Judges are not supposed, picketing judges is really not all that effective, since that's not how they decide cases, by measuring public opinion. And I think we're kind of adjusting to that transition. Listen, I understand the frustration, and I understand that people want to express that frustration. I don't agree, but as part of the democratic process. That said, there are limits, and I think there's limits that in many cases have been gone beyond what's appropriate.
You know, Mike, let me just phrase this, appropriately, because I thought the Washington Post editorial, which honed in on the county executive's benign neglect, was rather significant. He said, the Post said that if you're unhappy with the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs, you have a right to express yourself. Yeah. But the 3 justices who live in Montgomery County have a right to feel safe and secure in their homes.
I don't disagree with that, but I wouldn't necessarily put those two where we started our conversation and protesting in the same capacity. One, people shouldn't be vandalizing or shouldn't be setting fire to churches or any elements of in our faith community, irrespective of what's going on out there. Second, I think we have a very raw issue. I think people are still trying to kind of discern how does this get played, and we're in a place where Supreme Court justices actually live. There aren't many places in the country that actually exists, and so I think people have gone beyond the bounds of what they should do, and I think we've got to be able to reassert what kind of the rules of engagement need to be, and I think we should. I don't think the Post was wrong at all in their editorial. I think we need to make sure that there are boundaries. People understand what those boundaries are, but protesting on a street with a sign is not the same thing as setting a fire to a church or anything else, or actual violence. Those two things are very different activities, and I don't think we should conflate those.
Well, here's where they're linked, Mike, and this is where I will disagree with you. It was the condoning of the blatant and over-the-top protesting outside of Kavanaugh's home. It was by the Janes, by the Ruth Sinas group. Their announcement on Twitter that they were putting a bounty on these Supreme Court justices, and they were doxing these Supreme Court justices. And the county executive said nothing. He brushed off the Supreme Court marshal's concern as a publicity stunt. It's the condoning of these illegal activities which is the link. When lawlessness doesn't occur in a vacuum, and when criminals think they can get away with it because there's lawlessness, they're going to do it.
Well, and unfortunately, we've seen this lawlessness take place as a result of the last year and a half. So, I mean, if you're going to start linking those types of activities, we can go back to January 6th or preceding that, unfortunately, because we have had too many cases of those examples in our country over the last year and a half. And either side has been trying to justify their activities as either benign or as justified, and in no case are those actions appropriate, and it shouldn't be. So if we're going to step back,
in neither case should it be tolerated, but neither should have been the rioting and burning of cities. Shouldn't have been tolerated either. I want to go on to, I'm sorry, but we have to go on to our next topic because we're still in primary season, and early voting has already gone and began and gone for the primary races, and those reports suggest that there was a slight drop off in in-person voting, but there's also reports that mail-in voting and mail drop balloting has increased. But what was interesting is the most recent poll in the executive race, and that's the one that's the hot topic here, has Elrich and Blair within 6 points of one another, and the margin of error was 5.5. So is this race tightening as we come to election day on the 19th? Mike, I'll start with you.
It's probably tightening some. I don't think it's as tight as some of the polls have made. I mean, there were 3 polls, and basically they were kind of like Goldilocks in the porridge. There was a big one, there was a middle one, there was one where it was close, and I think reality is that it's probably close-ish, which it should be. It was a 77 vote margin the last time, and so I expect it will be close-ish. But I haven't seen any indication that shows that it's going to be that it's neck and neck.
I confess that when I looked at the polls, there was a little, unlike the Goldilocks approach, I took a look at which brand names was I most familiar with, because I saw polls from, frankly, some entities I had never heard of before, and there is a tendency sometimes to put out polls to be able to make a point. I will tell you, while I assumed Mark Elrich was going to win, I will say that the poll that was the best, I was most familiar with the underlying company. I was surprised by how close it was. And it certainly seemed to show a fair amount of momentum for Blair, who obviously has been spending a lot of money and out campaigning. So perhaps we're in for a surprise.
Well, there's still a large number of people who identify themselves as undecided. And those usually mean I've decided, I just don't want to talk about it. So I think we're going to have to wait and see. And of course, the anomaly here is because of the extensive use of mail-in balloting and drop-offs, we're not going to know the outcome of this election probably until 2 or 3 days after, because they don't count the mail-in ballots for 2 days after the 19th. So we're probably looking at Friday of next week. The next time we're on the air to chew it up and dissect it.
Yeah, the other thing that's been really interesting to me too is that typically if you're going to take out an incumbent, you have to draw a clear distinction between you and that incumbent. And neither Blair nor Reamer actually did that until about a week and a half ago, which to me seems really late in the game, and maybe it'll move the needle. I just was surprised that nobody kind of did this up until, through the spring and into the early summer, and they finally have. And so, and the gloves have kind of come off. There've been some pretty significant shots. I just don't know if it's too little too late.
Right. Well, I mean, I share that sentiment because I didn't think Blair was campaigning hard enough throughout the spring. I thought he was rather submissive on this. When we come back from this short break, in what should be a safe district, the latest poll has CD8 as only leaning left. And is critical race theory an issue that should be discussed in school board elections? Stay tuned. And welcome back. Alarm bells were set off this week as a group of school board candidates running as a slate rejected an endorsement by an alleged Republican group, which suggested that the slate of candidates supported the removal of anti-whiteness curriculum in the Montgomery County school system. Then 2 days later, the Washington Free Beacon reported that Montgomery County elementary schools in 4th and 5th grade will be taught a program inspired by the Southern Poverty Law Center to combat privilege and systemic racism. Mark, let's first discuss the endorsement and dissect the endorsement issue. Who or what is the group United Against Racism in Education, and is it associated with the Republican Party?
Well, it's an ad hoc conservative group. If you think about the Apple ballot, it's sort of the non-Apple ballot endorsement. It's a group that's very concerned about curriculum. Certainly there are Republicans involved, but it is a bipartisan group that includes both Democrats and independents as well.
But the way the candidates reacted to their endorsement, one would think, that was the third rail of Metro. I mean, they were, they thought it was electrifying that they would receive an endorsement from this group.
Well, and what's kind of puzzling about that in the article too is that they had those candidates had participated in the endorsement process and filled out forms and all that. That said, I can't quite understand, why they were so surprised that they had been endorsed. Obviously, I think they just wanted to disassociate themselves somewhat from the group.
So, Mike, the bigger issue, of course, is whether or not CRT is being taught in Montgomery County schools. And we have the Washington Free Beacon report on this, and whether that's appropriate. And in that article, one mother who was interviewed by the newspaper called CRT curriculum indoctrination, similar to what she experienced in Poland before the fall of the Soviet Union. So is this a legitimate, number one, is it a legitimate issue to be discussed in the school board race, but is it also something that should be taught in our schools?
Well, I continue to be kind of confounded by this whole discussion anyway. So that the critical race theory at its core is something that has been an academic pursuit. There was something that was, that unfortunately has been, because we can now take this discussion about race in schools and we could give it a name. And so, and we've called it that. So really, teaching of critical race theory isn't taking place in any schools. I think the notion of being able to understand the historical nature of how race has been addressed in the United States is important. And I think we should do that. And I don't think we've done that well over the last, well, whenever. The notion of how Blacks in America have been treated, in particular, how laws have been changed, and how, as a result of those things and other forms of discrimination have taken place in the United States, and vestiges of that still remain today, people need to understand how we got here, how those elements evolved. And I guess I'm intrigued by the notion that typically white people are concerned by the fact that we're going to discuss things that are pretty factual and happened in the United States, and are concerned that that's going to make somebody feel bad. I mean, it happened. It's a reality.
Let me push back a little bit on it. CRT is, without question, has its origin as a law school level set of theories. And it is a distinct departure from sort of the tradition of civil rights going back for many years, and kind of get into that. I think it's been very much disingenuous by many people in the public education community to simply say, to dismiss CRT as sort of this academic thing. It unquestionably, in my opinion at least, unquestionably, it has begun to influence the way the issues of race are discussed at the secondary school level. And that is a source of concern. And it does, again, it reflects a distinct departure from the spirit that emanated the civil rights movement in the 60s and into the 70s. And that is a cause for concern.
Well, we only have a minute left, so we're going to have to wrap up this portion of the discussion. Mike, I'll let you have the last word if you have a brief comment.
No, I think it's important for us, especially in a place like Montgomery County, to think about how we address race in our school system and have that kind of conversation. I think it's a challenging discussion. I think all parties have struggled with how to get there. And so I think we need to figure out how to do that, especially in a place like this where we are such a diverse community.
Well, you're absolutely right. But teaching that white people are oppressors is not the right answer. And I'm going to take the last word on this, because we're going on to our final topic. 30 seconds each. Who's going to win David Trone's race in CD8? And the more important race, which I think is CD4, where Donna Edwards and Glenn Ivey are running. Who's going to win that race? Mark, I'm going to start with you.
Well, it's a very competitive primary, so I'm not even sure who's going to be running against Trone. Matt Foldy and Neil Parrott are running very competitive races. That said, it is a D+1 or R+1. It's right in that middle spot, and is potentially one of the races that will decide who will control the House of Representatives.
Mike.
I think David will win, but I agree. I think it will be a very close race. And honestly, I think it's good for us to have some close races in the state of Maryland. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it keeps everybody honest. I think he'll pull it out, but I think it's going to make everybody wake up and pay attention. All
right. So the other race that I'm fascinated with is what's going to be the hotly contested Democratic primary in CD4, where former Prince George's County State's Attorney Glenn Ivey is contesting the primary against former Congresswoman Donna Edwards. Mike, according to the Ivey camp, they're now leading. What are your thoughts?
I think it's probably right. I think Glenn I think they're both strong candidates. It's been interesting to see the ads that have been aired. Some of the stuff that in the ads that aired about Donna are not inaccurate. She was not particularly great at constituent services. She did not have a successful track record of getting much through as far as legislative perspective. And I think for Glenn to identify those elements is not inappropriate. And I think as a result of that, he is a stronger candidate going into the primary and has a likelihood of winning.
And Mark?
Well, I picked up on the constituent service issue, and I think if anything, our local Washington congressmen and women should know you got to have good constituency service, or else that's what's expected of you. So it is definitely an appropriate way to go after her.
Well, as I think I mentioned earlier, I mean, I was shocked. You know, I've known Glenn Ivy professionally for several years. I don't know Mrs. Edwards. I can only speak to my relationship with Mr. Ivy, which has been professional as another attorney. And I've always gotten along very well with him. He's, a high class guy. But I must say that when Congresswoman Maxine Waters came out and endorsed Mr. Ivy today, I had to take a second look because I thought if anybody got endorsed by Maxine, anti-Maxine, it would have been Donna Edwards. So there's surprises all the time in politics.
They serve together, so you wonder what the backstory is in something like that, right?
I can see Mike doesn't want to get caught up in this one.
Not in that one, but I think it's a good race, and I think they're two good candidates. But I think that that's the downside, right? If you actually have already been in the position, we can evaluate you on how you did in the position. And I think the things that are being said as a result of that are not inaccurate, and I think that really helps Glenn.
All right. Well, thank you both. We're gonna take our break now, and stay tuned for parting shots when we come back from this short break. And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Mark Uncapher.
Well, thank you, Casey. For those people who haven't taken advantage of all the opportunities to vote, you still have the opportunity to do it in person live on Tuesday the 19th, and encourage you to do that. I would kind of comment, this primary season, we've seen a whole blizzard of organizations with confusing sounding names that have come in and weighed in on one side of the candidate. For those who've been used to the Washington Post and the Apple ballot and sort of familiar sources of information, I would strongly encourage you to kind of know who is providing you with information. We've got the Democratic Governors Association weighing in the Republican primary. We have Progressives for Progress, which turns out to be a real estate group. And obviously, we've already talked about United Against Racism. So know the source of your information before you decide how much you're going to rely on it.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Mike Knapp.
Well, since it has been an early primary season, people have been out voting at the early voting locations for the last 8 days. I've had an opportunity to go out and spend some time. My daughter's working for a couple of campaigns too. And, the thing that always strikes me is no matter what you think about candidates on any side of the aisle, within your primary, outside your primary, it's impressive. People have identified something that they feel strongly enough in to go publicly stake their claim and go out and try and convince people to vote for them. And that's not an easy task. And so I just want to, after talking to many of them, commend them for that and appreciate the voters taking the time to understand, as Mark said, what they represent, what they stand for, but just thank them for jumping out there, because quite honestly, without that, our democratic system doesn't work very well or at all. And it's not an easy thing to do. So I commend each of them for having taken that task on.
Thank you, Mike. So I'm gonna shift gears a little bit and channel my inner Cynthia Rubenstein for a second, which has been my frustration with the woefulness of the Washington Nationals baseball team. I'm old enough to remember when the first Washington Senators left for Minnesota. I saw them play at Griffith Stadium. I'm also old enough to remember when the second Washington Senators left for Texas. I saw them play at RFK Stadium. Now, the Washington Nationals are again in last place, just like in damn Yankees. And so why should we continue to sing the praises of Mike Rizzo, the genius general manager, because he's done a lousy job? They may have won in 2019, but we have COVID amnesia and have forgotten that they were in last place in 2020, last place in 2021, and last in the National League East once again. So I want to thank you both for being here this weekend. I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 This Week, I'm Casey Aiken.